Chris.
Good morning, Jody.
Chris Matthews. I would prefer to say Chris, Project Administrator par excellence Matthews.
Well, you can do that, but we might not get through the tape in 30 minutes.
But that has been your passion and your gifts throughout your professional ministry as an Adrian Dominican, correct?
It has.
Yes. Where did that bug come from, or that?
Well, I just like to have things organized. I like to know what's happening, when it's happening. I like to take a project and see it run through to its conclusion. And I guess I've always wanted to know what was going on and how to continue.
And let it blossom.
Yes.
Amen. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But your first few years were a preparation for that, like in Santo Domingo? I mean, Puerto Rico, wasn't it?
Yes.
And
yes.
then some time in Florida.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in Jackson, first Jackson, then Puerto Rico, and then Florida.
Mm-hmm. You lived with Virginia Hayford Wells at some point, didn't you?
In Pensacola, right, right. We learned early that she was decorator par excellence as she converted the rectory into the convent.
Oh, my.
Yes.
And the pictures were so high.
Oh, no, no.
They were eye level.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And the plants were in the right place.
They were.
Yes. God bless her. What would we have done without? Were you on the council when the general council when we had the renovation here on?
No, it was before
Before
the council that I was on.
That she was responsible for.
Yeah.
Speaking of the general council, with whom did you serve, Chris?
Pat Walter was the prioress, and then Pat Seaman, Molly Nicholson, Ann Guinan, and myself. It was a great group of women.
Oh. Well, thank you for those years of service. Prior to that, excuse me, you had served the congregation in the office of ministry, had you?
That's right. That's right.
And during whose...
Carol Yumanis and was the prioress at that time, and Nadine and Carol Jean. And
was that the first office of ministry?
No. Esther Kennedy and Meg Andrasic were there for, and then the new council developed a little more, and there were four of us: Mary Ellen McClanahan, Charlotte Hofer, Judy Apple, were the first four. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a nice group.
It was.
Yes.
It was.
So what was your focus?
Mary Ellen and I mainly worked on the ministry aspect and helping our sisters with the competency to go and interview for a job and so forth.
And making resumes, I presume.
That's right.
Because that was new to so many of us.
That's right.
Yeah.
But Meg and Esther laid a good foundation.
So you were there quite a few years.
6 years.
6 years. It seems to me when I noticed your resume that you always were at some place at 5, 6, or 7 years.
Yes, for the most part.
And then from the ministry, the national office grabbed you up.
Well, I had a year sabbatical, and then, pardon me, no, after the ministry, yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, after 60 years, it's hard to keep everything in sequence.
Well, we don't have to have
it was
in
after the
sequence.
ministry office that I went to the National Association of Church Personnel Administrators. It was located in Cincinnati. There was always urgings that we should move to Washington, but we never did until most recently, within the last couple of years it did. But it was a great service to church personnel. We created a document, Just Treatment for Those Who Work for the Church. We did another document on it was called, I can't think now, but it was on wages, just wages for church workers. Pathfinder was the name of it.
the group was made up of from religious congregations, priests and sisters?
It was all church workers. So it was the Bishops' Conference. It was priest personnel directors from dioceses and religious congregations, congregations of religious women, and parishes could become members as well.
And so as director, you were responsible for bringing that group together,
That's
correct?
right. We had an excellent board composed of a variety of
Right.
members.
Mm-hmm. But that was a major project right there.
That's right, just keeping the board. You know, by the time the board meetings was over, I was so tired of counting to 12 to make sure everybody was there that I
So-
was glad to see them go.
So perhaps many of the members were human resource directors.
They were.
Yes.
They were. Mm-hmm. They all were.
And did you work with the human resources here on campus ever?
Well, when I was on the council, I was the liaison with Mike Connell, who was very good to work for.
Yes.
And with.
We really appreciated his
That's
service
right.
as human resource director.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And do you keep in contact with him? At
Oh,
all?
I do. We go to lunch occasionally.
That's. Did you ever work with him after that?
Well, when I went to Toledo, after I was there a year or so, they were looking for a human resource director, and I was asked to chair the search committee. When I received the resumes, Mike Connell was one of the candidates. So I promptly went and said that I thought I had a conflict of interest, but they assured me that they knew I would be fair. So Mike Connell was hired.
And I'm sure he was grateful.
Yes, and he
to
did
work
a
with him
great
again.
job there too.
Yeah. Does he live in Adrian?
No, he lives in Holland, near Toledo.
Yes. Yes. So there was a year where you served as a consultant.
That's right. That's right. It
And-
was after I left NACPA, and
I bet you were in demand. I mean, having had that experience. Did you
Well-
give workshops or?
I gave some workshops. I did a lot of facilitation. The major thing was project I did with the Third Age Center at Fordham University, where they wanted to look at the concern of aging religious, funding, mergers, etc. So we brought together a number of human resource directors, priest personnel directors, people from the Bishop Conference, people from healthcare, those who might give us funding, and had a meeting on Staten Island for 3 days. The only thing that went wrong was we suddenly realized it was starting on Super Bowl Sunday. So we had to say, the Sunday agenda had to be adjusted a bit. But as a result of that meeting, we came to a realization that there was a possibility that religious congregations could be assisted by the members of the church in their retirement funding. And so a couple people were assigned to go to the Bishops' Conference and ask if there could be a collection for women religious as there is for priests. And that went through, and we've had that ever since.
Oh my! And they still do that.
They still do that, yes.
Oh.
They still have the office in Washington that, they work with.
Thanks for that wonderful group that
Right,
decided that.
right. It was a great group.
Yes. You imagine how many religious congregations have benefited
Yes,
from that.
yes.
That didn't have a retirement fund. Yes. Which our congregation did early on, didn't
Right,
it?
right.
Yeah. In the 60s, I think, or late 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a little later than that.
Little later than that. So then you had the call to leadership of the congregation.
That's
Thank
right.
you so much for
You're
those
welcome.
for those
It
years.
was a gift. It was a privilege.
Well, and you really got to know our sisters during
sure.
that time. probably gathering everyone for a general council. That was a job in itself, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Did you help with that?
With the what? General chapter, you
General
mean?
chapter. Yes.
Yes, I think I was. I know I was on the committee for that chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that you for 6 years.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Did anything dramatic happen during those years? Were any
Well, a few
schools
things
closed?
that I can't talk about. But
Were
you know,
some-
the renovation of Regina took place.
Okay.
You know, and I think we had some good processes that we worked with the congregation about community and poverty and so forth.
Any closing of schools during that time?
Well, Dominican closed and reopened, but then it did eventually close.
Dominican High in Detroit.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And is that building used today? Do you know?
It's used by another group as a school. I believe it's a school for the arts.
But the convent isn't there anymore,
No,
is it? Yes.
no.
Yes.
Mm-mm.
It used to house our literacy center.
That's right.
Initially.
That's
yes.
right.
Yes. You're currently, or through your lifetime, you were on many boards.
Mm-hmm.
Would you name some of those for us?
Well, when you're on the council, you're on a number of boards, and then I had the schools, so I was on those boards. I also worked with a group called Project Equality, which is a group that asks businesses to show how they have a diverse workforce.
Oh, for instance, can you name a company?
Well, I mean, they would go to Ford Motor Company, or they would, go to the telephone company or whatever, and ask them to do an audit of their workforce.
Oh my!
Mm-hmm.
So was this a national?
It is.
Project?
It's a national group. Mm-hmm.
And how long were you with?
Oh, I think I was with them about 5 years.
Oh, that must have been very interesting.
It was.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like how we worked against apartheid.
You know, I love our congregation and I love our women, but sometimes it's so good to get out with a group that has a different mix of people. And I remember one night we were at a meeting going down for dinner, and I was the first one there. And the waitress said to me, "Well, I'll see if your group's inside. Who are they?" I said, "Well, there's an African American, there's a Japanese person, there's a Caucasian male, and that was it, you know." So you just wasn't the usual group you were with.
Oh, how great!
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's stretching too, isn't
Right,
it?
it is. Yeah.
Was this the Project Equality?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And where did you? Where were the offices for?
Their offices were in Kansas City.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And that still exists.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
How come I never heard about that before? Probably a lot of us didn't.
Probably. Yeah.
Were you on the council when you?
I started when I was in Cincinnati, and I continued when I was on the council.
Oh my.
Mm-hmm.
And then today you live in Adrian.
I do.
And as we say, on Mill Road.
That's right.
And you gather frequently there, don't you?
We do. We do. We have a nice group of, there's just 12 apartments. The sisters that live there, Janet Persick, Marilyn Winter, Pat Fisher, myself, gather on every Wednesday, ordinarily, you know. And then a couple times a year, we have the whole group together from the complex.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a treat for sure.
Uh-huh.
So while you've been in Adrian, you served at Siena Heights
That's right.
University. I
Yes.
bet that was a joy. Was Peg Albert that?
I came the same time Peg did.
Oh.
Yes, and I worked in the Theological Studies program in Saginaw for 4 years until their funding was not renewed. And then I worked in the Alumni Relations Office.
The Theological Studies program was to serve the Lansing diocese, wasn't it?
Yes, and then they started one in Saginaw, but it didn't quite develop as well.
Was Saginaw in another diocese?
Yes,
Oh.
yes.
Detroit or?
No, it is a diocese in itself.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, I should, because that's where Bishop Untner was.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, that's sad that that didn't continue.
Uh-huh.
Was it the diocese of Saginaw that was paying?
Well, they tried the same model as they had in Lansing, where the parish paid some, the diocese paid some, and the person that was the student paid, and then the diocese withdrew from that model.
So Marilyn Barnett was
In Lansing, in Lansing, while I was in Saginaw.
she was directing the program too, wasn't she?
She was directing the Lansing one.
Lansing
She was very, very helpful
Yeah.
to me, you know, as we went along.
Yeah. Well, weren't you fortunate to work with the alumni office too?
Yes.
Jennifer Hamlin Church.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
What were some of the things you focused on?
Well,
during those
mostly it
years?
was the projects that we had, or the events, like homecoming, the dinner, the board meetings, so things like
And
that.
the yearly gatherings,
That was the homecoming.
the homecoming.
I mean, in the
that
dinner
was cool.
theater, yes.
And that's when the outstanding alumni are
That's
honored.
right. That's right.
That's always a joy.
It is. It's
Yeah.
one of the nicest things that we have, yes.
And they still do that, I
They
presume.
do. Oh, sure.
But we have to do the
That's right.
nominations.
That's right.
Right.
We can nominate any alum for that award, and we usually do.
I hope that continues and some more of our sisters are honored.
Well, the latest one was Nadine Foley was determined that Catherine de Klerk would get an award, and she did.
Oh, that's
So.
great. One of her last
Well, yeah.
gracious
Uh-huh.
invitations. You also, these days, are retired.
Oh, I don't like to say that word. I like to say I finished working, or I finished my ministry at Siena in June last year.
I used to say I finished my 9-to-5 job.
Well, Siena was never 9 to 5. It was very ad hoc.
But I see you everywhere, Chris. So thank you for all the generous acts. I do know you turned 80,
That's right.
but you wanted to celebrate with whom?
Well, I decided that it might be a good idea if all those Adrian Dominicans living in Lenawee County celebrated together. So Diane and I got together and put together
Diane Odette?
Diane Odette, a gathering, and there were 23 of us who attended and just had a good time one afternoon for a couple hours.
Celebrating
80 years.
which means at least 60 years in the
That's right,
congregation.
for most,
And
yes.
that you were able to celebrate.
Right, right,
A miracle in itself.
yes.
Now, our viewers are going to wonder from whence you came, Chris. It's either Chicago or Detroit.
Well, not always, but it was Detroit. I grew up in Detroit. I went to Dominican High. I had 3 sisters and a brother. 2 of my sisters are still living. I'm the youngest, which is amazes people. My brother was younger than I am, but
he's deceased.
Yeah, but and we're all in pretty good health.
Amen.
Amen.
And your sisters live on the east side?
No, my sisters, one of my sisters lives in New Jersey, and the other in Atlanta.
Oh, my.
Mm-hmm.
And do you ever get together as 3
Oh,
sisters?
well, we've
named
gone to the
Matthews?
condo in Venice,
Oh.
and of course, there's always weddings.
Yes.
Yes.
And baptisms.
Well, we don't always get to the baptisms.
Oh.
Oh.
And who were some of your teachers at Dominican High?
Oh, well, Therese Craig was, and she was my sponsor. And
Rose Terrence.
Rose Terrence. And Grace Ellen Minton who was just a lovely woman. And Sister William taught math when I was a freshman, and I walked in and she said, "Oh, not another Matthews." I was the fourth one, you know. So.
But had you had our sisters in grade school?
No, I went to 2 different grade schools because we moved in when I was in 7th grade. But I had Dominicans. I had Racine Dominicans and Columbus Dominicans.
Oh my!
So,
did they ever become aware that you became an Adrian?
oh, I let them know.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes. Have you met any of them through your professional life?
No.
No. And,
Jody, you didn't ask me about something that's very dear to my heart.
well, I know there's several things dear to your heart.
And I have an idea our time might be getting it.
Yes. What?
You
tell
didn't
me.
ask me about South Africa.
Oh, I am so sorry.
Yes.
I am sorry. What a joy.
It was.
Yes. How did that come about, Chris?
Well, I always wanted to go to South Africa. And there was a time when a group was preparing. And I went to the meeting, you know, of anyone interested. But then I was selected for the general council.
Oh.
But I was fortunate enough to meet with the group to facilitate their decision-making about who would go. And that's when Fran Lamar and Mary Margaret Pahuchki and Jean Tobin went to Modimong. And then several years later, when I was in the Diocese of Toledo, the opportunity came again. And so I volunteered, and I went with Mary Bobian and Jerry Magel. And we were in Kroonstead, and Mary Jane Levinsky, Mary Margaret, and Jean were in Johannesburg. So after a while, they said, well, the short ones are in Johannesburg, and the tall ones are in Kroonstead.
Kroonstead. Was that north of Johannesburg?
No, it was about 2 hours south
Oh,
in the Orange Free State.
Okay.
It was a very rural part of the country. Yeah.
And what was your ministry there?
Well, the government had a program for job development, training youth. That meant 18 to 35. So we would research what kind of project was needed, what kind of training was needed. We would find a trainer. We would recruit the students, get the project or the classes going, and mentor them as they went along. And then we would help them find jobs. But then we'd have to, it was a small town, so they could only use so many people who knew furniture making or some of the other skills, catering and so forth. So we were always sort of overlapped. When we got one group in the classroom, we started, what's the next project going to be? So.
Were these English South Africans, or were they native South Africans?
They were native South Africans.
And they knew English, didn't they?
Not all.
No.
And but they pretended they did a lot. You know, they pretended they understood what we were saying.
I thought it was a must in the schools.
Well, they do. In the schools, they learn English, they learn Afrikaans, and they learn their native language. But as all of us know, and myself included, some of us learn languages better than others. But basically, we could get along very well in English.
Did you ever get to Cape Hope?
Cape Town?
Cape Town?
Yes.
And isn't the tip Cape Hope?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
And
what was the situation as far as apartheid at that time?
they had said apartheid was over at that time. Now, earlier, when our sisters were in Modimong, they, you know, it was very much evident. And they were even at the elections for Nelson Mandela. They were the guides or the guards on the elections, monitors. But, I mean, they say it was over, but, you know, there were definitely signs that...
Side effects of that.
Well, it's still, that much of it still existed.
before we leave one another today, every year, or every 2 years, I believe it is, we bring to campus those men and women who work in our institutions.
Yes.
I think they call it a sponsorship
That's right.
gathering.
That's right.
Now, I know, as a fact, you were at the beginning of that, the formation of that. Would you mind sharing the story?
Oh, it's a story. When I was with the ministry office, we would frequently be part of the council meetings, and Nadine Foley would say,
She was on the council.
she was at the council at that time, you know, we should get together those who work in our institutions. A time would go by, and then she'd say, I wonder if we could ever get together some of those who work in our institutions. And time would go by, and then she'd say, you know, there are those good people out there working at our institutions. How can we support them? So after hearing that, one day I went to her office and I said, Nadine, you keep saying we should get together the people from our institutions, so let's do it. And she just looked at me and she said, well, how would that ever happen? I said, well, maybe if you could decide, you meaning the council, you know, what institutions, who should come, where it should be, when it should be, how you were going to pay for it, what the program would be, it could happen. She said, oh, that's amazing. And so we sat there and we answered those questions.
Oh, my.
And we had the first sponsorship conference. So Nadine was, you know, the inspiration behind it.
Yes.
I mean, it's just always so good to see people from our institutions coming together. And the wealth that they bring and the, you know, the charism that we all share.
Yes. I know you're a frequent visitor at Maria.
Right.
What do you see happening among our sisters that inspires you?
I think our women are very kind to one another. They're very conscious of one another. I can't believe how we all find someone to help. Whether it's bringing someone out to the garden, whether it's doing their laundry, whether it's bringing them to chapel or to meals or just visiting.
Or feeding them.
Feeding them. We're just so kind to one another. And
that permeates Maria, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes.
It does. And Regina, I think it's us. It's what we do.
Well, thank you for the joy you bring to so many sisters at Maria. I know that's dear to your heart. And I want to say, may you rest projects in peace. But I do know that you are currently in a group called the Indivisibles.
That's right. Right. It's a national group, the
Oh.
Indivisibles, but we have the Lenawee chapter, or the Lenawee Indivisible group, which started right after the current election. And it, well, I should say, I guess its mission is to watch what's happening with the current government, to praise when possible, to
Check.
suggest, check, monitor, write letters, make phone calls, march, etc. And a number of our women are part of it. And so
And that's life-giving.
that's right. It was a decision that was made rather than having the Adrian Dominicans stay in and do their own thing. Let's get out in the broader community. So this is what we chose. We still meet with the agonize or organize group to sort of report what people are doing, what's going on, what other outreach we can have.
Do you meet with local officials?
Oh, we have. I mean, it's a local grassroots group, but we have met with local officials concerning the immigration concern, and we have gone to when Wahlberg's in town, Representative Wahlberg. We've gone to those meetings. Some of us, yes.
Well, thank you for doing that in our name and all the sisters too that join you. And thank you for your time today.
Oh, you're
Riz.
welcome.
God
You're
bless you for all the ministries that you have done in our name.
Right.
God bless you.